Divorce lawyers, what's the best kept secret couples have kept from one another? I got a buddy who practices divorce law, and he told me this doozy. So, this guy walks into his attorney's office saying he needs representation. My friend, fresh out of law school and eager for any paying client, is ready to take him on. The man insists he's the victim, claiming his wife blindsided him with divorce papers less than a year into their marriage. She apparently had substantial financial resources and wasn't shy about using them. A few weeks later, my friend receives a call from an arbitrator representing the wife's attorney, arranging a meeting that seems to be about negotiating a fair settlement. The husband and my friend show up expecting a routine discussion, but things quickly go sideways. It turns out the husband has a series of deeply troubling secrets he never disclosed. First, he had a persistent issue with inappropriate online content, which had already cost him several good jobs over the years. Second, he had fathered 2 children with another woman, something he never disclosed to his wife, and was behind on his financial obligations for their care. But the most devastating discovery came later. The wife, growing suspicious of his behavior, decided one night to check his phone while he was asleep. What she found was deeply disturbing. He had been exchanging explicit messages with a teenage girl, the daughter of one of his former co-workers. She acted quickly, saving the text conversations as evidence, but avoiding any illegal content to ensure everything remained within the law. At that point, the husband went pale, started sweating, and seemed to fully grasp the seriousness of his situation. My colleague asked for a private moment to speak with him directly. When he calmly asked whether any of these revelations were true, the husband could barely respond. His panic said enough. My colleague advised him that it would be in his best interest to resolve the matter immediately, withdraw any prior demands, and take responsibility for his actions. Confronted with the evidence, he finally agreed to a settlement. Even after the agreement was finalized, he refused to make payments voluntarily. As a result, my colleague had to bring in professional debt collectors to ensure the terms were enforced, guaranteeing that the financial consequences of his choices were properly upheld. Story 2. After having our daughter, life felt amazing. My husband was attentive and loving throughout the pregnancy and during the first year of our baby's life. I didn't experience any depression, and we were both overjoyed for that entire year. I took her out every day, rain or shine, started running again, and got back in shape. My husband received a raise, and together we took on managing a few more apartment buildings, which felt exciting and empowering. But about a year ago, things started to change. I'm not entirely sure what triggered it. Maybe it was delayed stress or emotional burnout for both of us. My husband began acting more critical, and it felt like nothing I did was good enough anymore. I keep our home very clean, friends even comment on it, but he started fixating on small things and pointing out flaws. He became distant and often said hurtful things that left me confused and heartbroken. At first, I couldn't understand why this was happening. I was doing my best every day caring for our baby and supporting our family. Over time, I realized the issue wasn't about chores or small details. It was something deeper, something that had changed between us. I thought he was just overworked, so we came up with a plan for him to leave his day job at the museum and focus on managing our apartment buildings full-time. But he can't make that change until this May for several reasons. Since then, things have become really difficult. The criticism feels constant, relentless, and draining. Suddenly, I'm told I'm not logical, that I am lazy, I don't think right, or don't take care of things properly. There's always a list of things I supposedly never do, and even when I do them, it doesn't seem to matter. When I make dinner, instead of appreciation, I get told it's not good enough or that it doesn't count because I never cook anyway. The same thing happens with laundry. I do it regularly, but he says it's my job and that I don't even do it the right way. After hearing those kinds of remarks for so long, it starts to wear you down. Even when you know you're trying your best, that kind of negativity seeps in. After months of it, I began to wonder, am I really as incapable as he says, or have I just lost confidence in myself? Now I don't even know what to believe anymore. I keep thinking the person who seems to be losing control must be the one at fault, and right now that feels like me. But who really started all of this? Was it his constant criticism, or was it me reacting to it? Who's truly the problem here? Him for tearing me down day after day, or me for finally breaking under the pressure? Will either of us ever stop this cycle? Has he always been this way and I just didn't see it? Or did something change in him over time? Some days, it feels like there's no clear way out. I've always been open to getting help. I've taken antidepressants and anti-anxiety medication on and off since my teen years. They've never been a long-term solution for me, but sometimes just a few weeks is enough to help me regain balance. He, however, doesn't believe in that kind of help. We even tried marriage counseling, but it didn't go anywhere. He would put on a good front during sessions, saying all the right things while denying what actually happens at home. The counselors usually see through it, but in the end, they tell us there's no progress if he isn't truly willing to participate. Now I've reached a point where the hopelessness feels heavy and constant. Every morning, I find myself bracing before he even speaks, waiting for the next wave of criticism. It's like living in a storm that never truly ends. I keep trying to hold everything together, for our child, for the memory of the life we once had, but the hope that things will feel peaceful again grows dimmer each day. I'm just so tired. Tired of defending myself, tired of being misunderstood, and tired of feeling like nothing I do will ever be enough. Story 3. This story goes back to around the year 2000. I joined the Army thinking it would provide stability and help me support the family I was starting. My son had just been born in late 1999, and I wanted to make sure we had a secure future. Looking back now, I realized joining the military might not have been the best decision for me personally, but at the time, it felt like the right path. While I was serving, my then partner decided she no longer wanted me in her life, though she still wanted financial support. We ended up getting divorced, a decision that ironically seemed to surprise her. From that point on, I arranged for my child support to be automatically deducted from my paycheck to ensure everything was handled properly and there could be no misunderstandings about my responsibilities. But the accusations still came. For the next 14 years, I found myself constantly having to defend against them. There were times when my bank account was suddenly emptied by the state of Oklahoma due to claims of unpaid support, claims that later turned out to be mistakes. They always returned the money eventually, but sometimes it took months, and during those times, I went without basic things just trying to stay afloat. Then, in late 2014, I was served with new paperwork. The case was being moved to a different county for reasons that were never clearly explained. It wasn't even closer to her, so I could only assume there was some behind-the-scenes reason for the change. No one ever gave me an answer about why it was happening, but I had no choice except to follow the process and prepare for another round of legal battles. Not long after that, I received a letter in the mail from her attorney, informing me that I was required to appear in court on a certain date. After doing a bit of research, I realized that in my state, mail, registered or otherwise, doesn't count as an official summons, so I didn't respond. Over the next several months, a few court dates apparently came and went without my knowledge. Naturally, I missed them all because I was never formally notified. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me. I checked the state's court website and discovered a list of missed hearings, along with another one scheduled for May 2016. Around May 2015, I finally showed up, unsure what to expect, but assuming it was probably related to a support increase since money always seemed to weigh heavily on her mind. What with 3 children, the eldest being mine, she was pregnant with a 4th from someone unknown, and at least 2 adult children to support. She didn't show up that day. The judge looked over the paperwork and quickly noticed that I had missed several prior court dates, but also recognized that I had never been properly served for any of them, including the one I was attending. She asked how I even knew to be there, and I explained that I'd found the information on the court's website after sensing that something might be coming. The judge seemed both surprised and slightly impressed that I had shown up on my own initiative, while the other party had not. After confirming that no one else was waiting in the hallway, her patience clearly ran out. She expressed frustration over how much time was being wasted on cases fueled by lingering personal conflicts instead of genuine legal matters. I expressed that I wished I could do something to make it stop. She replied, "Young man, there is nothing you can do, but I am the judge, and I will do something. Your child support order is now expressly unmodifiable for 2 years. I will assume that a man smart enough to discover his court date without being served is smart enough to understand the implications. Enjoy your day, idiot savant tinker." The implications were clear. She was stuck with the child support amount agreed upon back in 2000 when she was working in retail, and I was earning $8.25 per hour. She could not alter it for 2 years. In less than 2 years from that date, the child would turn 18. The state does not allow retroactive increases, nor does it require support beyond 18 or after high school graduation. Story 4. I am an attorney. Several years ago, I primarily worked as a financial consultant specializing in forensic accounting. I was the expert attorneys hired to compile income and financial data and testify in court, often unraveling intricate financial webs that most people would find overwhelming. I worked at an accounting firm that represented a sports agent as a client. I was assigned to a high-profile divorce case, collaborating closely with attorneys in 2 different states on the husband's side. The stakes were high, the figures significant, and the pressure intense. In any city, if you handle high-end divorce cases as an expert witness, you eventually find yourself working repeatedly with a small circle of attorneys or law firms. After seeing both sides of many cases, you begin to realize that there is a fixed system at play, a rhythm of legal maneuvering that feels almost inevitable. My post is not about the client's personal secrets, but about how I managed to quietly disrupt that familiar system, bending it toward resolution rather than prolonged conflict. Let's be clear. In an ideal world, a husband and wife could sit down and reach a reasonable settlement on their own. If necessary, they could bring in an advisor or a mediator. Larger cases might involve complex valuations of closely held stock options, professional goodwill, and other assets that are difficult to quantify. But not so fast. Grasshopper. Taxes must be paid, the gears of the legal system must be oiled, and professionals must be compensated. The client's interests are not always perfectly aligned with the professional's incentives. Billable hours must be secured. Sure, attorneys on both sides may know one another and might even prefer a smooth resolution, but in practice, communication often occurs through depositions, summons, pleadings, and other formal channels, ensuring that the case drags on. My fees depended on the case progressing. If a matter settled quickly, I would simply be paid for the time already invested. That never bothered me. It was not my only source of income. Some of my cases stretched on for years, generating long trails of billable hours for the attorneys involved. That brings us to the case in question. I had traveled across the country to meet with my client, Mr. X, and his attorneys. We gathered in a conference room high above the city, discussing intricate financial issues and possible settlement strategies. Mr. X struck me as a decent man, composed, reasonable, and measured, and up to that point, nothing particularly unusual had occurred in the case. When lunchtime arrived, Mr. X declined to go out, not wanting to deal with fans or interruptions. The attorneys left to eat, and I stepped out briefly to make a few calls about my other cases. I returned sooner than expected and found Mr. X still seated in the conference room. After a moment of silence, he looked at me and asked, "You're not an attorney, you're my valuation expert. You've seen a lot of cases. What should I do?" It was the question I had quietly hoped to avoid. I had encountered stranger and more uncomfortable situations in my career, but this one demanded both honesty and clarity. "You asked me a direct question, and you engaged me," I said. "I would appreciate it if you keep my advice confidential. If you and your wife can come to a general understanding of what the marital assets are worth and how they should be divided, work out the details together, then have a law firm draft the formal agreement. At the end of the day, your wife is the mother of your children, and they need both of you to cooperate. Any money spent on professional fees would be far better used to support your family." He considered this for a moment, picked up a spreadsheet I had prepared, asked a few questions, and together we discussed a proposed figure that might work for both him and his wife. The spreadsheet was set aside, the attorneys returned, and I caught my flight home. A week later, Mr. X called to tell me the case had settled amicably. Everything was resolved without unnecessary conflict. I felt better about that case than any other I had handled. As a child of divorce myself, I understood the importance of ending disputes before they consumed everyone involved. The law firms never learned of our private conversation, probably for the best, since it disrupted the usual billing rhythm. Story 5. My first husband and I married far too young and ended up divorced with 2 children by the time I was 22. We fought constantly, and one day he had me by the neck while our youngest watched. It was a light bulb moment for both of us. We realized we were setting a terrible example for our children and decided we would not let them believe this was how mothers and fathers treated each other. We didn't need lawyers because we had already made a promise to always put our boys first. I handled all the paperwork myself, using the Michigan divorce book with minor children, and we worked together at every step of the process. It wasn't easy. It required letting go of short-term frustrations for the greater good, like the time he accidentally triggered an IRS audit for me. We tried to avoid involving the friend of the court by each claiming one child, since our incomes were roughly the same. However, the court decided to pursue him because, as they put it, somebody has to pay. It has been 15 years, and I'm still frustrated about that decision. I ended up giving him all the child support money back because the whole process was absurd. In the end, we essentially paid the state $25 a month in fees just to be harassed. I never wanted anything bad to happen to him. He's the father of my children. I even encouraged him to go on the first date with his now wife, and they are far better matched. I'm remarried now and have a third son, and my first in-laws absolutely adore him. I'll never forget when my first father-in-law held my youngest for the first time and whispered, "I'm their grandpa, and they're your brothers, so I'm your grandpa too." I melted in that moment. I'm telling you this because it is possible to separate and have everyone come out better off. It can be done. Last weekend, we all sat together and watched our oldest graduate. We get along wonderfully, and I consider myself truly blessed. My ex-husband is a good father and a good husband to his second wife. We simply weren't the right match for each other. Stay strong. The right path isn't always the easiest or the path of least resistance. It takes effort, patience, and compassion, but it can lead to better outcomes for everyone involved. Story 6. It would take far too long to describe all of them, but two cases stand out vividly. The first involved a man who sincerely believed he was some sort of Superman, a physically and mentally perfect specimen. He wrote me numerous 10-page letters, also addressed to the managing partner, who wasn't even in my department, proclaiming his own greatness and threatening to unleash the dogs of war on anyone who opposed him, including me. All of this, mind you, was over the division of very modest relationship assets. He wanted to sue his ex-wife for 2 years' worth of unused dog food he claimed to have purchased for a dog acquired after their separation. He insisted the dog had died in a car crash brought on by its grief over the failed marriage. I often felt uneasy leaving the building at night because of his volatility. He would strip naked on his balcony and throw rocks at his neighbors' windows, making sure they saw him. That story ended tragically when he later died at a party from alcohol poisoning. The second case I handled involved a woman whose ex-husband was allowed only supervised visits with their children, not because of any proven wrongdoing, but simply because he hadn't yet arranged suitable accommodations to host them. My client, however, tried to push him completely out of their lives by making very serious accusations about SA during those supervised visits. When I carefully explained, in professional and general terms, that providing false or misleading information to the court could have serious legal consequences, she became extremely upset and began shouting over the phone. We ended the attorney-client relationship immediately. After that, she started calling other lawyers at my firm using different names, each time asking for advice about the same situation. It didn't take long for everyone to realize what was happening, so the team began referring her back to me, at which point she would hang up and try again the next day under another name. After experiences like these, I no longer practice family law. Story 7. Not a lawyer, just a bartender. And this one ended in a divorce with more drama than you could ever imagine. There was a married couple. Let's call them Joe and Susan, who were regulars at my bar. On Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays, they always came in together. They were extremely touchy-feely, often making out while nursing a few beers. Then, on Mondays and Tuesdays, Susan would show up with a constantly changing lineup of men. She was just as affectionate with them, kissing and flirting openly. On Wednesdays and Thursdays, Joe would appear with his own rotating cast of women, behaving in much the same way. Naturally, I assumed they were in some kind of open relationship. I didn't particularly care. After a while, I simply let the years behind the bar wash over me, their chaotic personal lives blending into the background noise of bar life, just another weekly spectacle in the endless rhythm of closing time. Then one day, Susan walked in and confided that she was divorcing Joe. According to her, Joe was a terrible husband who had cheated on her. I acted surprised and offered my sympathy. As she spoke, she insisted that she was entirely virtuous, that she had never cheated on Joe or anyone else, and that she had been faithful throughout their marriage. A little while later, I ran into Joe at another bar. He told me that Susan was divorcing him, but he was determined to win the divorce. According to him, he had hired a private detective who had supposedly caught Susan cheating. I feigned surprise and offered my sympathy. In the process, he too insisted that he was virtuous, that he had never cheated on Susan or anyone else, and that he had been nothing but faithful throughout their marriage. Shortly after that, I stopped working at that bar. I grew a beard so fewer people would recognize me when I went out, partly to avoid being pulled into their ongoing drama, and partly because I'd realized that some people's lives are simply too bizarre to follow closely without risking your own sense of sanity. Story 8. So, I'm not a lawyer, but let me tell you a sad and frustrating story about a friend of mine. His wife had been married before, to a man I'll call Rich Guy. They were in a serious car accident that ended with Rich Guy's death. She kept his last name and inherited a considerable sum of money. Eventually, she moved in with my friend who had a long-standing drinking problem. He owned a small business that brought in a good amount of cash, and she seemed perfectly content with the arrangement. Fast forward 12 years to when I actually got to know him. My friend told me his wife was divorcing him, and to make matters worse, he had put everything in her name. The house, the car, even the business. They had a child together, now 10 years old, who had been a complete surprise to him. She openly admitted to cheating and confessed that she had manipulated him into transferring all their assets into her name. Then, almost casually, she told him she still loved her deceased husband. She said bluntly that he was nothing like her late spouse and that he needed to move out immediately. On top of that, she demanded half of his business and threatened to drain whatever money he had left. My buddy was on the verge of taking his own life. He was prescribed medication that he became moderately dependent on, layered over the heavy drinking he was already struggling with. Remember, the alcoholism never really went away. I couldn't believe she had used him like that, convincing him to put the now paid-off house, the car, and everything else in her name. She was stunningly attractive, and he wasn't, so maybe that played a role. Still, it was completely devastating, especially after all those years together. Story 9. I'm not a divorce lawyer, but a close friend of mine went through a particularly tragic divorce that I feel compelled to share. He owned a share of a small business and had always managed his finances carefully. Eventually, he sold his interest and moved to Florida, easing into semi-retirement while still taking occasional work to support his 2 children and maintain a bit of personal spending money. A few months into this new chapter, his wife approached him with a request to explore intimacy with another woman. He agreed, likely assuming it would lead to a consensual 3-way experience. Instead, she began a full-fledged affair with the other woman. Within months, their marriage collapsed, and they divorced. For reasons that were never entirely clear, she was initially awarded custody of their children. He began rebuilding his life, found a steady job, and consistently made his child support payments. Over time, however, his children's quality of life began to decline. They moved from a comfortable home into a trailer park, and it eventually came to light that the other woman had been diverting money intended for the children to fund gender transition procedures, or so the story went, though some of it may have been spent on other related expenses. Fortunately, he ultimately regained custody of his children. That victory, however, came with its own set of challenges, including chaotic encounters at parent-teacher conferences and other school events. The entire ordeal, sadly, only seemed to feed into the Florida man stereotype. Story 10. There might have been something illegal about it, maybe fraud-related or something along those lines. I'm not a lawyer, but from what I can tell, it wasn't unreasonable for the judge to act as he did. The man essentially quit his high-paying job while lying about being ill, forcing his wife to support them both, which any decent person would do under those circumstances. That alone was a deeply selfish and disgraceful act. He was already a doctor and perfectly capable of continuing his practice, but his arrogance and deceit turned him into a complete jerk. Now, after years of pretending, he has to face the consequences of his actions. The judge essentially held him accountable for the choices he freely made. If he didn't want to pay up, he shouldn't have behaved like such a colossal jerk. His only real path forward is to return to work as a doctor, something that will be difficult after years away from practice, and he may not earn as much initially as he once did. But that's the natural outcome of his own decisions. All of this could have been entirely avoided if he hadn't acted like an a-hole in the first place, and that's really the point. To me, this feels just and deeply satisfying. It doesn't matter whether he technically broke the law. What matters is that he was a complete jerk and now he's being held accountable. Court-ordered comeuppance for behavior like this is exactly what society should allow. People shouldn't be able to manipulate, lie, and act selfishly without facing the consequences. If anything, this case proves that deceit and arrogance eventually catch up to you, and it's gratifying to see justice, even in a civil context, finally being served. Story 11. From the very beginning, I've been completely transparent about my intentions, keeping timelines clear to avoid any confusion. Before our relationship even began, I told her that I wasn't certain I'd ever want to get married again, though I could be convinced someday. I also reminded her that it had taken nearly 3 years before I married my ex, and I had no intention of rushing into another marriage any faster than that. After all, I had known my ex for almost 2 years before we even started dating. For me, marriage is a serious commitment, something not to be taken lightly. I wouldn't even be divorced now if my ex hadn't had a long and deeply serious affair, an experience that permanently shaped how I view relationships and trust. I never intended to string her along indefinitely. Somewhere along the way, though, she decided that my timeline should be much shorter. No amount of emotional outbursts, guilt trips, or teary conversations is going to make me ready any faster. I've had to weather a few meltdowns when someone she knows got engaged or when she saw a lavish wedding on television. Honestly, at times, it has felt easier to just stage a fake wedding for the sake of peace, but the truth is the only tangible outcomes of marriage are the appearance of commitment and the legal right to half of what we build together. That feels risky to me, especially if she were ever to cheat and I had to endure another painful divorce. Story 12. Not a lawyer, but here's a story I came to know over a couple of years working as a gas station attendant. A regular customer of mine, a father and his 2 children, a son around 10 and a daughter about 12, came into the store like clockwork every morning. During the school year, they stopped in on their way to drop the kids off at school, and in the summer, on their way to a babysitter. Over the years, I greeted the 3 of them Monday through Friday and got to know them on a somewhat personal level, hearing bits and pieces about their daily routines and activities. During that time, I eventually learned from my own father that this man had full custody of his children because his ex-wife hadn't wanted them. He had traded away nearly everything he'd built over the years to give his kids the love and stability they deserved. She got the more expensive car, the house, the boat, and half of their savings. When I mentioned this to him, he just smiled and said, "For my kids, that woman can have all the wealth. They're all that mattered to me." At that moment, all I wanted to do was cry. Story 13. My aunt had a huge wedding that turned out to be fake. She was in on it, as were the groom and his family, but her parents, my dad, aunts, uncles, friends, and everyone else had no idea. The groom held an important job and cared deeply about appearances. My aunt was pregnant with my cousin, and back in the 1980s, he wanted it to look like he was doing the right thing without actually marrying her. I suppose her self-esteem must have been pretty low for her to go along with it. My dad and grandparents had no idea she was pregnant. After the wedding, my aunt and her husband went off on an extended honeymoon and returned home just a month or so before she gave birth. They kept the charade going for quite a while. Eventually, they got married for real, quietly and in secret, and even had another child together. But in the end, they divorced because the guy turned out to be, frankly, an a-hole. My grandmother didn't find out the truth about the fake wedding until years later, long after the divorce. She discovered the marriage certificate and noticed that the date didn't match the supposed wedding day. When she asked about it, my aunt finally came clean and explained the entire story. Story 14. I've heard firsthand what it's like to be completely blindsided. There was a couple with 2 children, about 5 and 7 years old. The husband began to sense that something wasn't right. Quietly, he did a little digging and found just enough to raise serious concern. He stayed calm, hired a private investigator, and let them do their work. The investigator was thorough, collecting photos, cell phone records, credit card statements, videos, and more. In the end, all the evidence was compiled into a binder nearly 2 inches thick. After about a month of gathering evidence and quietly removing her name from certain credit cards and accounts, he dropped a small bombshell. He wanted a divorce. She stormed out and quickly hired an aggressive female attorney. If I remember correctly, their first meeting took place soon after, him with his lawyer, her with hers. As soon as they sat down, she declared, "He's leaving me. I want the house, his retirement, half the assets, and a substantial amount of child support." His response wasn't a dramatic mic drop. It was more of a binder drop. He laid out the massive collection of evidence, photos of her making out with another man, dinner receipts, hotel bills, and more. The shock on her face was unmistakable, and her lawyer looked equally stunned. Calmly, he offered her $20,000 in cash and the option to walk away. She accepted. In the end, he kept the house, retained custody of the kids, and she was completely out of his life. Story 15. Not a lawyer, but I once learned about one of the best-kept secret deals I've ever heard of. Back in 1972, A married couple had their gas utility account activated at their home, but the gas company never completed the paperwork correctly. As a result, they were never billed. Their account remained active, but the billing system never caught up, and they ended up receiving free gas service indefinitely. Years later, the couple divorced, and the husband kept the house, along with its free gas service. The oversight went unnoticed until around 2014, when the gas company finally discovered the mistake. Legally, they could only backbill for a limited period, covering just a few years of usage. But here's the twist. The husband instructed the company to send any bills to his ex-wife. Their divorce settlement had included a clause stating that if the gas company ever discovered the free service, she would be responsible for paying any past charges. This arrangement ensured that the ex-wife could never alert the gas company to the error without saddling herself with the bill. What's truly remarkable is that 2 attorneys and a judge signed off on the settlement, all fully aware that the husband was effectively walking away with free gas for decades. Story 16. My parents went through a divorce that seemed to drag on forever, nearly 3 years before all the legal matters were finally resolved. So I think my mom's lawyer was extremely thorough, while my dad's either was incompetent or forgetful, constantly losing paperwork and overlooking certain assets my dad owned. Maybe he was just trying to be sneaky. When they thought everything was finally settled, my mom received a letter in the mail about an annuity my dad had, worth around $20,000. He had wanted to hide it, and she likely never would have discovered it if he hadn't forgotten to update the address on the account. My mom's name was on the account alongside my dad's, so she opened the letter and took it straight to her lawyer. He told her she could easily claim the entire amount if she wanted to contest it, since my dad had kept it hidden throughout the entire divorce process. But my mom was exhausted from dealing with lawyers and just told him to take half. My dad tried to challenge her decision, but even his own attorney knew he had messed up. Story 17. I'm not a lawyer, but this is a story I learned from a buddy of mine who went through a messy divorce and managed to protect himself financially with a surprisingly clever move. He owned a contracting business that he'd built from the ground up. It was thriving and represented a huge part of his life and net worth. During the divorce proceedings, he and his soon-to-be ex agreed, at least on paper, that the business should be sold and the proceeds divided. What she didn't realize was how that decision would eventually turn against her. The business sold for just over $2 million, and instead of alimony, she was awarded 60% of the proceeds. She thought she had come out ahead financially, until the hidden complications surfaced. The sale triggered a tax audit, something neither of them had anticipated. By the time it was over, they owed more than $700,000 in back taxes and penalties. When they went back to court to determine who was responsible for the debt, she argued it was his business, so he should pay all of it. My friend countered calmly, pointing out that since she had taken 60% of the proceeds, it only made sense that she should also bear 60% of the tax liability. He reasoned that it would be unfair for him to shoulder the entire burden when she had benefited just as much from the sale. The judge agreed with him. She was held legally responsible for 60% of the debt, about $420,000 plus accumulating interest. Unfortunately for her, she had already spent most of the proceeds from the divorce. Not only was she suddenly under financial strain, but she now faced the daunting task of paying a massive debt to the government, something she had never seen coming. My friend, on the other hand, used his portion of the proceeds to launch a new business and immediately paid off his share of the debt, shielding himself from future financial trouble. What makes this story particularly relevant to the topic of secrets couples keep from one another is that, during the divorce, she had no idea about the potential tax consequences or how the debt would ultimately be divided. In a way, the best-kept secret wasn't a personal betrayal. It was a financial strategy that gave him a clear advantage, one she only recognized once the legal and tax fallout unfolded. Divorces are about more than relationships. They're about money, strategy, and often hidden truths that one party doesn't fully grasp until it's too late. In this case, the secret wasn't cruel, it was simply clever, and in the end, it left him standing while she scrambled to manage the consequences. Story 18. I really wish more parents made a genuine effort to handle divorce in a way that's healthy for their children, but in my experience, very few actually do. I can almost guarantee that my parents would describe their own divorce as polite, amicable, and mature, but that couldn't have been further from the truth I lived through. My parents divorced when I was about 4 or 5 years old. To anyone outside the family, it looked like a smooth, peaceful separation. People even praised them for being so reasonable and cooperative. The public image they worked hard to maintain was one of civility and mutual respect. In reality, it was a very different story. They may not have screamed at each other in public, but both had subtle ways of undermining the other. It wasn't blatant, but it was constant enough to leave a mark. I remember the tone my mom used when I asked her to pick me up from school on a day my dad couldn't, just that drawn out. Oh, that carried quiet frustration and resentment. My dad, on the other hand, would hesitate before agreeing to pay for a plane ticket to visit family because my mom couldn't, making me feel like I was asking too much. Those moments seemed small, but they weren't neutral. Each pause, each sigh, each careful word carried the weight of their unspoken anger and disappointment, and as a child, I absorbed every bit of it. The worst part was realizing, even at that young age, that the burden of their conflict often fell on me. Parents who claim to be amicable during a divorce aren't always thinking about their children. They're thinking about appearances, about maintaining the illusion that they can handle separation with grace. My parents told themselves, and everyone else, that their divorce was amicable. In reality, they were simply avoiding confrontation in public while quietly passing the emotional fallout onto me. For a child, that created a constant undercurrent of tension, anxiety, and guilt, a survival mode where I learned to navigate adult conflict long before I understood it. From my perspective, the best-kept secret they were keeping from each other and from the world was the truth about how their divorce actually felt behind closed doors. They wanted everyone to believe it was fair, calm, and controlled, when in fact, every interaction carried layers of manipulation, criticism, and subtle control. Children are remarkably perceptive. Even if they can't fully grasp adult dynamics, they feel the strain. The secret most divorcing couples hide is just how much of their resentment and emotional labor they transfer onto their children while insisting that everything is fine. I don't mean to suggest that all parents do this, but it's common enough to be worth mentioning. Many people claim a positive narrative about their divorce when what they really mean is that they've stopped yelling at each other, not that they're behaving with integrity or prioritizing their children's emotional well-being. True amicability isn't just a public performance. It's a private commitment to transparency, fairness, and protecting the child from unnecessary conflict. My parents never fully made that commitment, and the hidden truths of their separation shaped my experience far more than the polite image they presented to friends, family, and colleagues. Story 19. An East Coast husband, a seemingly successful man with a reported income of $1.5 million, was living a life full of secrets that few could have imagined. To everyone who knew him, he appeared to be a hard-working, affluent professional with a stable marriage. On the surface, he and his wife looked like a powerful couple living the dream of success and stability. But behind closed doors, the truth was far darker. The husband had been cheating on his wife repeatedly, 10 times in total, while maintaining the facade of a devoted family man. Then, near the very end of the divorce proceedings, just when his wife believed she finally understood the scope of his deceit, a revelation surfaced that shattered everything. It turned out he had been living a double life. Not only did he have another family in Seattle under a completely different name, but he also held a second job in the tech industry, earning $14 million annually. This secret life was entirely separate from the one he had built on the East Coast. And if that weren't shocking enough, his vested stock options from the Seattle position were valued at an astounding $214 million, an amount his wife could never have imagined existed. The discovery of this secret double life unfolded in a way that perfectly illustrates the unpredictability of digital exposure. The Seattle wife had posted a photo on social media, tagging him under his West Coast identity. Around the same time, the East Coast wife, completely unaware of his other family, posted a picture of him as well. Facial recognition software cross-referenced the two images and flagged a possible match under the West Coast name. That small technological coincidence brought the two wives into contact, and they quickly realized they had been sharing the same man all along. It's astonishing to consider the level of deception required to maintain multiple families, high-powered careers, and vast wealth under entirely separate identities. He had meticulously covered his tracks, keeping each life perfectly compartmentalized, but in the end he underestimated the power of modern technology and the inevitability of exposure in a digital age. Yet the story didn't end there. After both the East Coast and Seattle families uncovered the truth, even more shocking details came to light. It turned out he also had a third wife and family living in the Czech Republic. In an effort to avoid the fallout from family court and the legal consequences of his deception, he fled there. Authorities are now pursuing his extradition to face the complex tangle of legal, financial, and custodial consequences stemming from the collapse of his hidden lives. Story 20. In my dad's last divorce, an absolutely shocking secret came to light. His wife had been having an affair not only during their marriage, but throughout her previous 3 marriages as well. What made it even more astounding was that the affair was with her first boyfriend, who, unbelievably, was also her stepbrother. The layers of deception were staggering. It was the kind of best-kept secret people managed to conceal for decades, only for it to eventually surface and unravel everything. Neither my dad nor his wife wanted to settle quietly. Both were stubborn and unwilling to give an inch, which meant that every detail of their relationship and all the hidden betrayals eventually landed in court. During the proceedings, the secrets they had spent years concealing came spilling into the open. What had once been private became part of the public record, and the lawyers on both sides were left scrambling to untangle the web of personal history, financial complexity, and emotional fallout that defined their marriage. Of course, my dad was no angel in any of this. While the revelation of her affair was shocking, it didn't happen in a vacuum. He had his own deeply troubling history with her, including instances of physical abuse and even threatening her with a gun. Those actions cast a long shadow over the case, making the proceedings both emotionally volatile and legally complex. In the end, both of them, in their own ways, played themselves. Their hidden behaviors and unresolved anger surfaced in court, shaping the outcome far more than any single secret ever could. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.